Good morning, Hills Falls, and welcome to the feed. Here we are.
How would that be any different, Mike?
Yes, I know. It's March 14th, and we're here for the feed. We have our guests today are Bob and Jessie Haas. We're going to be talking about the Westminster Massacre, but first we have Marty, and she's going to bring us some local events.
And I'm very upset because Mike was telling us just before that he was going to wear his coonskin cap today in honor of the Westminster Massacre, but he was afraid that he would be making a fashion faux pas.
That's right. I'd be the only person.
Yes, mine's at the Carriers.
Yes.
Daniel Boone wasn't at the massacre.
Yeah, okay.
He wasn't.
Yeah, it was more tricorner hats or something like
Yes,
that.
that's true. That's true. So it would have been a fashion faux pas.
Yeah, it would have.
So just want to remind everybody that tickets are on sale for Jesus Christ Superstar. It's coming right up. The end of March, first week of April. Going to be a fantastic show. I believe Fact TV is taking some footage of the rehearsals right now,
yeah,
and pretty soon we'll have a little clip promo for you. And also this Friday is 3FBF, which is Third Friday Art, Music, Local Shopping, Food, and Fun. So there's a whole poster of events. If you see these events around town, the merchants are open later than normal. A lot of the merchants have some type of refreshments. There's music at the Cafe 7 has an artist. There's music at Flatiron. River Artisans is open. Sherwin Art Glass is doing a glass blowing demonstration. Rock and Hammer's open. The bookstore's open. Wyndham Antique Center open. Anastasia's Closet. So lots of businesses open, lots of activity
lots of
for
things to do.
3FB. And Hopelo has their Italian-style farm-to-table fix menu offered on their new thing, Fix, that they're doing.
Okay.
So
Have you tried that yet?
I have not tried that yet. I have not
Okay.
gone to Fix yet.
Well, we're waiting for your review.
Waiting for my review of Fix.
Marty does our local restaurant reviews here.
Yes, I
at
should
the
do
feed.
local restaurant reviews.
So anyway, Bob and Jessie, welcome to the feed.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
It's an auspicious date. Yesterday was the anniversary of the Westminster Massacre.
What did we decide on the way?
Well, it was 243 years ago.
243 years ago.
1775.
On March 13th, 1775, there was an event that occurred in Westminster that has been, many consider it, especially Vermonters consider it, the first shots fired in the Revolutionary War, right?
Right.
Well, yeah, certainly. Yeah, the first bloodshed.
Yeah. Okay. Jessie, how did you get an interest in Westminster and the Westminster Massacre?
Well, I was born and grew up in Westminster in his house. So you kind of had to be interested in history. I sort of...
Spoken like a true daughter.
It's an old
It was beat into me,
farmhouse,
yes.
basically. And one thing that got me going was we bought the house. My wife and I got married in 1958. It'll be 60 years this year. And
Wow,
we
congratulations.
bought the house just before we got married and moved in. And we lived there a while. And I happened to go opening the back door one day, and there's a latch, an old-fashioned latch on the back door. And on the crossbar of the latch was the initials AH. So that got me to wonder, who was AH and who lived here and all of that. So I started doing a little research and found out it was Atherton Hall, came from Cape Cod in 1795. And then I bought a history of Westminster by Elizabeth Simons. And she had quite a bit about the massacre, and that's how I first heard
Oh, really?
about it.
So you can actually trace back pretty much to the people that were in different houses at different times in Westminster because they kept that the records were kept that well.
The land records are
Yeah.
good. We have excellent land records for the town of Westminster. And Ruth Grandy has researched, kind of gone back through and researched all the transfers. So it was a pretty good record of who owned what, when, and who lived.
It's really
Yeah.
unusual, isn't it? Wouldn't you think, to have that, to be able to trace back that far? Or you think that was the norm back then? That's how they...
They usually took pretty good care of their land records, towns did. Unless, of course, you have fires and things like that, and
Right.
floods that destroy those records. But
Yeah.
Ruth Grandy got them on digitized, so you can just plug your little thing into the television, into the computer, and
Oh, that's it.
Bring
You
it
can
up to-
check it out.
Right.
So
So-
when did you write your book, Jesse?
Well, I'll tell you in just a second. Here. It came out in 2011.
Oh, great. So it's relatively recent.
It's pretty recent. Yeah, the Westminster Historical Society wanted to update their history, and I started working on that, and it just became clear there was so much about what Westminster during the Revolutionary time and around the massacre, that it kind of like it deserved to be its own book.
Right.
And
And-
so history. It came out with History Press, and yeah.
They're the ones that suggested we do this, right?
Well, I can't remember at this point. I don't remember if it was me or them,
I was
but
thinking it was
it
them,
might have
but-
been them that suggested that
so
we just
let's-
do a little breakout. So in the larger history, we talk about it as well, but this book is the one that really goes into a lot of detail about the massacre. And go ahead.
Well, as we talk about land records and stuff, the massacre occurred because of land, right? And disputes over land and taxes, or because what was the
That was part of it, yeah.
What was the situation in this part of what is now Vermont? But what was it in 1775? Because it wasn't fish or fowl, right? It was sort of the
Accounts differed.
yeah, accounts different. Yeah. So what was the situation? How would you describe it?
Situation over on this side of the state was more about the courts, and there was a lot of uproar down in Massachusetts in 1774 about the courts and closing the courthouses and forcing the judges to declare that they were retired.
Right. Well, because Massachusetts was under martial law at that point.
Oh, okay.
So
So there was, like in Worcester, there was it Worcester, Jesse? Where
Worcester.
6,000 people turned out rioting and basically they shut the
essentially
courts
it was a
down.
peaceful protest,
Yeah.
but 6,000 farmers out there in the street. You're like, okay, I guess maybe we
That's
would
a
hold
lot
court.
of people
yeah.
when you think about
Yeah.
it. And basically, that's sort of the spark for this event was that they wanted to close the court, or
Yeah, that was the spark. Yeah, but it kind of
what's the background?
The
What led up to that?
the background was after Massachusetts was placed under martial law following the Boston Tea Party. Then there was a big reaction in the colonies, and the colonies voted under Articles of Association, basically to try and put a trade embargo on Great Britain. And New York was the only colony that didn't sign that.
Oh, okay.
And of course, we here in what's now Vermont were, it was under dispute, but we were part of New York. People in this area voted that they wanted to follow the Articles of Association. And you're like, but my colonial government doesn't,
Yeah,
and there
yeah.
was part of the articles that said anybody that didn't sign on, there'd be an embargo on them. They'd sort of be included in the embargo
Oh, so
of
like
Great
it
Britain.
was
So
a retaliation against
Yeah.
local people.
there would have been that, but but also, I think it's really important to think about the personalities as well. There
Yeah.
were
So who were the major players? What were the two groups? I know there were Yorkers, right?
yeah.
And Yorkers were like what?
Well, there was the Tories
Or
were
Tories?
the people that
Were loyal to-
attacked the courthouse, and the Whigs, spelled WHIG, were the ones that took over the courthouse, and there was only a matter of, I don't know, like a half an hour between the time that the party from Brattleboro, along with Sheriff Patterson, got there, and just about a half an hour before that, our guys, the Whigs, took over the courthouse.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
it was
So
close.
it could have all
It
been
could have all gone
different,
differently.
you know.
Right, but so in Westminster, an Irish lawyer named Creanbrush arrived in, what does my timeline say, 1772.
Uh-huh.
He was a real wheeler dealer. He was a loyalist. He was a friend of the governor of New York, who had given him a lot of land on the western side of the state. So he came here to see if he could sell his land and get rich. Came into Cumberland County, which was basically southern Vermont, and got the Westminster named basically the capital, the shire town of the county. Got the courthouse built. Got himself elected to the assembly, and he was.
He really wasn't.
He was
Yeah.
adept at pulling wires, and there was sort of like this importation of. Basically, most of them were from Ireland, these Irish Tories that came in with very strong loyalist inclinations. They get the court here, so there's suddenly a lot more legal activity, and everybody was in debt. There was no money circulating.
Because of the colony, yeah.
And so these people were, of course, in an ideal position to take advantage of that because they kind of owned the courts, they owned the law. So there were a lot of lawsuits. So that was part of it. But people felt like not only are they being preyed upon financially, but they're being preyed upon by people with a very specific political bent. And the opinion was strongly divided here. It wasn't like it was absolutely a territory that totally, wanted
so
to
it's
stand
sort of
against
like
the
how
king.
we
It was
are
like
today.
a civil war.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like we are today. But the fact that the government was in the hands of the people who were strongly in favor of New York and strongly in favor of Great Britain, I think made a strong,
Everybody
feeling.
wanted to do something.
And so they had seen that the courts had been stopped in Massachusetts by thousands of people. So they decided that the court should be stopped here. And so 40 men from Rockingham went up to visit the judge who lived in Chester.
Really?
So you see, but the
Yeah, that's-
scale difference in Massachusetts, 4,000 guys went to the judge's house and he decided to resign.
Yeah.
Here the population is lower, so
Yeah.
40 people visit the judge in Chester and he says, well, we have this murder to try, but after that, maybe we could close the court and, there won't be any violence.
Yeah.
And as soon as the guys left his house, he sent word to Brattleboro to the other two judges and the sheriff, and they start to raise a posse because they weren't
going to do that.
They were like, no, these guys are not going to stop our court. There seem to be spies in every camp. So almost as soon as he sends word to Brattleboro, the people who had visited him get word that he's treacherously gone behind their backs, and they decide, okay, we are going to go occupy the courthouse and make sure that we get to have our say. And as Dad said, so there's these two people are marching up from Brattleboro in an armed posse.
Right.
People are kind of coming from all over, Rockingham, Westminster, and all over, and they converge in Westminster. They pause at the house of the captain of the Westminster militia, and they are not armed. What they did is they stopped briefly to have a conference, and they grabbed poles basically from his wood pile, and they went up the hill to the courthouse and got there about half an hour before the sheriff arrives.
Now, is the scale the same though as like Rockingham? Are they all located? Because it seems to me like without a car, that's a bit of a hike.
They were booking it. I think, and it was March,
I was
and
just
it was
thinking, walking from Brattleboro. I mean,
Walking
it's
from
a big
Brattleboro, that could
challenge.
take like
horses
most
were
of a
involved.
day.
No,
right?
the people had horses. It was.
But still, that's a bit
But
of
not
haul.
good roads.
Yeah.
Trails.
No 91 back
and
then.
marched. Was it I don't know. Was it a snowy march like this was?
Yeah, that's the other thing I
But
wanted to ask.
people were really moving around.
They really were.
Yeah.
Another issue was that people here were used to, under the New Hampshire rule, they were governing by town meeting. They had more say in what the laws were going to be written, but under the New York rule, which happened what year?
Well, it was 1764, essentially.
Yeah, well, with New York rule, it was altogether different, and their laws, there was not as much freedom as what we had.
Yeah, or
under New
representation
Hampshire.
in,
Right.
And they had to people, so a lot of some of the people had huge tracts of land, and they rented it out to farmers. It wasn't like farmers owning their own land, so it was just an entirely different situation.
Very different like landowner political situation. So what happens, there are about 100 Whigs have occupied the courthouse. The sheriff comes up with his armed group, and there's quite a hostile standoff with threats from from basically the government of the area saying, we'll blow a hole through you, and
really?
We don't want to talk
So
to
did
you.
all this happen outside, or were they in the courthouse?
The Whigs were in the courthouse. The sheriff was
Well,
kept outside. And after, a standoff, the sheriff and his party went down the hill to a tavern that was owned by a Tory. It was locally called the Tory Tavern.
Uh-huh.
And did a lot
Does
of...
that house still stand?
No,
Oh.
no, it's...
Because that would have been down the
Yeah,
hill,
it's-
sort of where the farm is.
down, sort of little past the farm. So they went down and they had a lot of refreshments. a lot of liquid refreshments.
Those liquid refreshments get you every time.
Meanwhile, up at the courthouse, the left did what the left always does and sat down and wrote a white paper. And then a bunch of them
Sang songs,
went out to get supper. And but they left, a decent, maybe 30 people left. And at about midnight, the
really? This happened
sheriff's men
Yeah.
came up the hill and attacked. And I should actually read the account of...
Yeah.
This was written sort of by an inquest on the William French, the man who was killed. This is a very contemporaneous account, but an official account. About midnight or a little before, the sentry at the door espied some men with guns, and he gave the word to man the doors, and the walk was crowded. Immediately the sheriff and his company marched up fast within about 10 rods of the door, and then the word was given, take aim, and then fire. 3 fired immediately. The word fire was repeated. God damn you, fire! Send them to hell, was most or all the words that were to be heard for some time.
Wow.
And so, they blasted them. They blasted these unarmed guys who were, crowded in the walk of the courthouse. And some of them were very severely injured. William French, in particular, a young farmer from down near Brattleboro, was shot twice in the head.
Wow.
What was the thing that was most outrageous to people was that they burst in, they beat them up. My post-it seems no okay. So here's what. There were several men wounded. One was shot with 4 bullets, one of which went through his brain, of which wound he died the next day. Then they rushed in with their guns, swords, and clubs, and did most cruelly mammock several more, and took some that were not wounded, and those that were, and crowded them all in close prison together, because the prison cells were down there. And told them that they should all be in hell before the next night, and that they did wish that there were 40 more in the same case with that dying man. Then they put him into prison. When they put him into prison, they took and dragged him as one would a dog, and would mock him as he lay gasping, and make sport for themselves at his dying motions.
Oh, boy.
And so this happened,
Yeah.
but a bunch of them escaped.
And
they went everywhere. They roused the countryside, essentially. They went to Walpole, to Northfield, Massachusetts, Brattleboro, all over, and raised the militia. And so what was a peaceful protest, the government fired on the unarmed protesters.
Right.
Eventually killed 2, but it looked like more would die at that point. Retook the courthouse. The next
So the
morning,
militia came up.
and so by the next afternoon, there were 400 armed people in the streets of Westminster.
Wow.
So they were done with this whole nonviolence thing at that point. They were like, they went home and got their guns, and they came back and took the courthouse. Went in. There was no violence at that point.
Right.
I think with 400
Yeah,
angry
against
people
the
out there, they
sheriffs.
were kind of like, well, yeah, you can have it. And they put all the New York officials in the cells, and rounded up everybody else they could find. So like the massacre was peaceful protest. The next day was a revolt, was a revolution.
Really?
Some of them wanted to burn the courthouse with the people in it,
Wow.
with the Tories in it. But I think it was Colonel Bellows from Walpole that sort of talked them out of it.
And he was the
Calmed them
Bellows that
down a
was-
little bit.
Yeah, related to that
yeah.
family. Yeah, and apparently there was the Dummerston Putney people that were the most outraged. But of course, they were the badly wounded. The dead man was French from Dummerston.
Right, William
and,
French.
And the one who died later was Houghton from Putney.
Oh,
and
wow.
so those are
So
all
those-
familiar
they were
names.
all
But
family and-
they were family and friends, and
Yeah.
it was it was like you think about Kent State or something
Oh, yeah,
like that.
yeah,
You know,
exactly. That's
it
a
was
good
like
example.
Peaceful
unarmed
protest.
Yeah.
people that are shot by their own government.
Right.
And-
Daniel Houghton was shot in the abdomen and lived about a week. It must have really suffered.
Oh,
but
I
William
can't
French
imagine.
seems to be the one that got most of the PR.
Yeah, because we have
Yeah.
a couple pictures. There's, if you go to the old cemetery in Westminster,
Yeah.
there's the gravestone that we have here, and then
Right.
there's a obelisk,
Yeah.
basically, that
Yep.
has his name.
Yeah, and it has Houghton's name is on one side.
really?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but Houghton was buried there with just a natural field stone, and then
Uh-huh.
the location was lost, essentially, so they don't know where he was buried. But he's at least memorialized on the French memorial.
Yeah, but it's pretty amazing what it says on the. Do you have the inscription? Because it is really political. It's like.
Yeah.
Yeah, here William French,
Yeah.
his body lies for murder, his blood for vengeance cries. King George III, his Tory crew, that a ball in his head shot through. For liberty and his country's good, he lost his life and dearest blood.
Yeah.
So that's, yeah.
Yeah.
I guess it's quite fascinating because I had no idea.
Yeah.
And they put it right up to King George. I mean, it wasn't,
Right.
Yeah, it was really seen as, like you said, Kent State is like the perfect example. It's like, it was it's the government did this to us.
Yeah, and very clearly. And it was the first time that those kind of protests had been met with official violence. And of course, because they were totally outnumbered in Massachusetts,
Yeah,
and not
yeah.
so much here. And I have to think that what they consumed down at the Tory Tavern,
Yeah, I'm sure that helped.
under cover of midnight, and I had
Yeah.
a great deal of liquor. It seemed like a good idea, but it was like the spark. And the thing, this was about a month before the battles of Lexington and Concord, so nobody knows that's going to happen. The New York Assembly voted £1,000 to come and put down this rebellion.
Oh, did
and
they
General Gage, who was basically in charge of Massachusetts and the British Army, had gathered arms. They were on a ship called the King's Fisher that was sent to New York. And about the time it got there, Lexington and Concord happened. And New York at that point made up its mind, you know what, we're with the colonies.
Yeah.
And over here, we went from, hating New York to calling them our brethren, but also still being really clear, we are not you.
Yeah.
We are done. I mean, New
That
York's
sort of
government
was also the seed of Vermont becoming Vermont. then,
right. New York government was over here. It was
Yeah.
never reestablished. I mean, there were fights about it. They tried, but it was done.
And was it also the seed of the Green Mountain Boys, or was that
They were-
they were already doing this stuff and it just
They were, and they
propelled
came
them
over.
along?
They were among the militias who came and responded, and Ethan Allen was here. And so they basically tried to appropriate the event as part of their thing.
stuff.
Yeah.
But it was slightly related, but really not. And the governor of New York at the time was very clear about that when he wrote to the king, this is not what's happening over on the west. And
Yeah.
the governor, his plans included, not only sending the arms, but he knew everybody was in debt. He was like, if I can open court there, and
They would just gonna
they-
foreclose on everybody's
Yeah,
land
there
and
wouldn't
stuff.
be a shilling left among them.
Yeah.
He said in his letter. So,
Because in one of the accounts I read, that was part of one of the factors, right? Is that
Yeah.
the farmers didn't have any money.
No money
And the
stirring.
court court
yeah.
really held sway over whether they even
Well,
had
you
land or
could
not.
be jailed for debt. And
yeah,
so,
that's true.
you know, so it wasn't just like, oh, wow, I'm in debt, I'll declare bankruptcy. It was,
Yeah,
you know, you
it
could be
was-
thrown in jail
Because they had
for it.
debtor's prison then.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, in fact, the Judge Chandler, who kind of sparked all this, the one that they went to visit, he actually died in Westminster jail cell
Wow.
in debt. And
It
he
was
had been,
many
he had been
years
jailed
later,
for debt.
though. Yeah.
Many years later, he died
That's
there.
just-
Jailed for debt and was literally left to rot there because they thought if they took his body they'd take on his debts, and they like
Really?
dug a hole
Yeah.
and dragged him out into the cemetery. It was gas,
Dug
you
a
know,
hole
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
fence and
yeah,
Didn't-
slit his body, but yeah, it was
That is
Wow.
amazing.
So yeah, sort
That's
of
a pretty good
wicked poetic
Truth,
Yeah,
justice.
is,
wow.
truth is stranger than
Oh,
fiction.
Yeah,
Totally.
and I guess we should study these things because again, all these things seem parallels to our current
Absolutely.
history. Sorry, we're almost out of time.
Okay.
But great, thank you for having it. Whatever happened? Like I did go down to Westminster over the weekend. And
Oh, show the
yeah,
key.
and we-
Yes.
It's
This
the
is-
key to the courthouse.
And so this is the actual key that was. Let's see, what camera are we on? This is the actual key that was to the Westminster Courthouse, and it's in the town hall now.
Yeah,
There's
It's
some
in,
artifacts
in the Historical Society
in the
Museum.
Yeah. So if you ever want to find out about some of this stuff, you should go to the Historical Society Museum. But what happened to the courthouse? Because that's one of the things I was looking for over the weekend.
Yeah.
I found the grave sites of William French. You can go see those. It's they're well well marked, and it's easy
Yeah.
to get to.
The
But the courthouse is like
it was no longer being used because Westminster was for a while was a half shire town, they called it. Marlborough was the other one. So they switched around, and then
it was Newfane. Then it all was
and then it went to
consolidated at
Newfane, so
Newfane.
the courthouse was no longer being used, and they tore it down about 1806. I
There's
believe.
bits of it in a lot of those houses. Actually, we acquired in the museum a door from an interior door from the courthouse that had
really
been up in
in somebody else's house.
David Wright's attic. It was in his attic door
Wow.
with it penciled on it that it was a door to the courthouse that he left to us when he died. But so who knows what bits
Yeah,
of it
yeah.
I'm sure are in people's sheds and barns and
It's
attics.
like living
Yeah.
history. You can go and
Absolutely,
find
yeah,
these
but it's
things.
recycling too. It was like, well, they're taking this building down. There's lots of good stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
And it sounds like what is Route 5 now used to split around and there was a green in the middle, or?
Yeah, of course, it was a oxen and horse-drawn era. The roads
Yeah.
were a lot quieter, but at that point, the church was at like here in the middle of the road. The courthouse is here in the middle of the road, and it was a very broad. What was it called? A 10-rod highway or
I
something?
believe so, yeah.
I mean, it was a
So it's
very
10 rods
broad.
and a rod
Yeah.
is like
16 and a half
Oh,
feet.
16?
Yeah, so it was, like when you go to Massachusetts and you see those, like Western Mass, you see those towns with a very broad street in the center with, 2 rows of trees and
Uh-huh.
sidewalks. It was like, it was
Like
meant
that,
to be
huh?
like that. It was, and it was a training ground because that was like the militia could.
Okay, yeah,
the
people would
militia
march
training
there, yeah,
ground.
yeah,
and
yeah.
I imagine people also
Like a
grazing
parade
their
ground
animals.
almost, yeah.
It was probably a lot of it was grassy.
Oh, this is great. I'm sorry, but we're out of time. We're really getting going. Like we were talking before, it's like we get here and we get talking, and
Yeah.
before you know it. So I'd like to invite you guys back, and maybe we could talk about maybe sometime in the summer. Because the other thing is the weather. We never talked about that, but I can't imagine being out in March.
I know.
It's
In your
amazing.
buckskins.
These guys were tough. They
Yeah.
moved all over the place. They went faster than we were in cars.
Yeah.
I mean,
I
imagine 400 people there in the village of Westminster. Where did they
stay?
Where did they sleep? Where
Yeah,
did they
yeah.
eat? Where did they get hay for the
And
horses?
they found
Yeah.
out about it and they got there before Facebook,
Yeah, how'd they do that?
How
All
they
right.
did it for Facebook.
Okay,
Just
well-
real quick though, if anyone wants to read your book, where is it available, Jessie?
This book, it's in a lot of local libraries. It's available for sale at Village Square Bookstore.
I was just going to ask. I'm sure
And
the bookstore
also
has it.
at the Westminster Library in the
Original.
town hall. So
Great, great, because I think it would make a very interesting read for anyone local that didn't, like myself, that knew nothing about it.
All right, and thank you guys for coming again.
thanks
And
for
that's
having
it for
us.
the feed. Thank you, folks,
Bye,
and see you
everyone.
next week.
That's it, folks, for the feed. Be sure to catch us every Wednesdays at 7:30 a.m. Also, find us on Facebook at Fact TV or tell us what you think. TheFeed8@gmail.com. And don't forget to watch the feed online at www.factdate.com.